Sweat pooled in the stiff collar of Preston's tuxedo, gleaming under the harsh altar lights. He wouldn't look at her. Instead, he dropped both the rings and the microphone, backing away from the altar and leaving a suffocating silence. Then, a slow, methodical clap echoed from the back pew. Dust motes drifted through the shafts of light cutting through the stained glass windows, heavy and slow. Naomi watched one single speck of dust land on the sheer white tool covering her forearm. She focused on it because looking at the man standing 2 feet away from her was making her nauseous. Preston Reed was sweating. Not a delicate, nervous glisten, but a heavy, sour sweat that smelled aggressively of Tom Ford cologne and panic. He kept shifting his weight from his left foot to his right. Every time he moved, his polished leather shoes let out a faint, pathetic squeak against the marble floor of the sanctuary. "I can't," he mumbled. The words didn't echo. They just fell out of his mouth and died in the 2 feet of negative space between them. Naomi's brain required exactly 4 seconds to process the syllables. Her scalp throbbed. The stylist had braided her natural hair too tightly to anchor the massive 20-pound veil and hairpiece, and the bobby pins were currently scraping against her skull like tiny knives. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the imported silk wrapping her waist. A dress that had cost more than her first car. "Excuse me?" Naomi whispered. Her voice was raspy. She hadn't drank water since 6 in the morning, terrified of bloating. Her tongue felt like dry cotton. Preston finally looked up, though his eyes darted to her collarbone rather than meeting her gaze. "I can't do this, Naomi. The merger. The debt. It's too much. My dad. The numbers don't work. I'm sorry." He took a step backward. Another squeak of the shoes. The elderly priest, a short man with thick bifocals, stood frozen with his mouth slightly open, a gold-leaf Bible trembling in his liver-spotted hands. Behind them, the 400 guests sitting in the suffocating heat of the church began to realize something was wrong. It started as a low hum, the rustle of silk dresses, the clearing of throats, the snapping shut of paper fans. It swelled into a frantic, buzzing murmur. Naomi felt a hot, prickling flush creep up her neck. She wasn't crying. She didn't feel heartbroken. She felt an ugly, visceral embarrassment that tasted like copper in the back of her mouth. This marriage was a transaction. Everyone knew it, even if nobody printed it on the embossed invitations. The Reed family needed the shipping ports Naomi's family controlled, as though Naomi's family needed the massive injection of clean capital the Reeds promised. It was a business deal draped in white lace and imported lilies, and Preston was voiding the contract on live stream. Naomi's fingers twitched around her bouquet. The stems were wrapped in white satin, but she gripped them so tightly she could feel the crushed plant matter seeping moisture through the ribbon. She wanted to throw it at his head. She wanted to scream. Instead, she just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated humiliation washing over her. Then, the murmurs in the pews abruptly died. It wasn't a gradual fading of noise. It was an instant collective holding of breath. The silence was so sudden, so heavy, it made Naomi's ears pop. Footsteps echoed from the center aisle. Click, clack, click, slow, measured, completely unbothered. Naomi turned her head, the heavy veil dragging painfully against her neck. Walking down the velvet-lined aisle was a man who had no business being here. He wore a charcoal suit, immaculately tailored, with no tie, and the top 2 buttons of his crisp black shirt undone. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the priest. Leon Brooks. He didn't look like a Brooks. He had the sharp, unforgiving features of a soul-born enforcer, which was exactly what he was, before he violently bought out the city's underground syndicates and sanitized his surname for American tax registries. He was the shadow creditor behind the Reed family's empire. He was the reason Preston's father had been desperate enough to arrange this marriage in the first place. Leon smelled faintly of rain, ozone, and unlit tobacco, a sharp cold contrast to the suffocatingly sweet scent of the wilting lilies surrounding the altar. He didn't stop until he reached the bottom of the altar steps. He slid one hand into his pocket, his posture relaxed, almost lazy. But his eyes, dark and flat, were fixed entirely on Preston. "Preston," Leon said. His voice was low, possessing a quiet gravel that easily carried to the high-vaulted ceilings of the church. "You're ruining a very expensive party." Preston swallowed so hard it was audible. His Adam's apple bobbed violently. "Leon, Mr. Brooks, I told my father. We can't leverage the shipping routes. The math." "I don't care about the math right now," Leon interrupted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I care about the $20 million your father borrowed from my organization, under the explicit guarantee that this merger would go through today." In the front row, Arthur Reed, Preston's father, stood up. His face was the color of old oatmeal. "Leon, please, this is a private family matter. We can renegotiate on Monday." Leon didn't even look at him. He kept his gaze on the groom. "Is it void, Preston?" Preston looked at his father, then at Naomi, and finally at the floor. He nodded. "It's void." Naomi felt her stomach drop. It was over. She was going to have to walk back down this aisle alone, past 400 pitying, whispering faces, into a financial ruin that would strip her family of everything they had built. Her hands shook. She hated Preston in that moment, but she hated herself more for wearing the dress, for playing the part, for thinking this would work. Leon tilted his head, processing the groom's admission. He sighed, a short-clipped sound of annoyance. Then, he finally shifted his gaze to Naomi. His eyes scanned her, not with the leering, hungry gaze she was used to from the men in her father's boardroom. It was an assessing look. He took in the rigid set of her shoulders, the trembling bouquet, the furious, humiliated tears burning in her eyes that she stubbornly refused to let fall. "Standard contract law," Leon said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "If the debtor defaults on the primary arrangement," he took one step up the altar, "the collateral defaults to the creditor." He stopped right in front of Naomi. The scent of ozone and tobacco enveloped her, cutting through her nausea. "Then she's mine," Leon said. Naomi blinked, her brain misfiring. The heavy bobby pins digging into her scalp suddenly seemed very far away. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dropping the polite, raspy whisper from earlier and adopting the flat, clipped tone she used in hostile board meetings. Leon looked down at her. He was at least 6 inches taller, and up close, she could see a faint, jagged scar cutting through the end of his left eyebrow. "The Reeds owe me $20 million. You own the ports they were going to use to pay me. Cut out the middleman. You walk out of here with me." "I am not a piece of commercial real estate," Naomi fired back, gripping the bouquet so tightly a thorn pierced the satin ribbon and dug into her thumb. A sharp, grounding prick of pain. "Today you are," Leon stated smoothly. "You can stand here and let these 400 people watch you cry, or you can take my arm and leave with the only man in this room who isn't currently terrified of his own shadow." He didn't smile. He didn't offer a gentle, romantic hand. He just stood there, an immovable object, offering her an exit door lined with razor blades. Naomi looked past him. Preston was literally inching toward the side door of the sacristy, eager to escape. The priest looked like he might pass out. Her own family sat in the second row in stunned, paralyzed silence. Nobody was coming up here to save her. If she stayed, she was the jilted bride, the ruined collateral. If she left with the head of the Korean syndicate, she was something else entirely. Dangerous, untouchable, insane. She looked back at Leon. She noticed the slight tension in his jaw. For all his relaxed posture, he was coiled tight, ready for violence if anyone stepped up to stop him. "I need a drink," Naomi muttered. "I have Macallan in the car," Leon replied without missing a beat. Naomi threw her $20,000 bouquet squarely at Preston's chest. It hit him with a heavy thud, scattering white petals over his ruined tuxedo. Without looking back to see his reaction, she grabbed the massive, heavy folds of her silk skirt, hauling the fabric up in her hands. She didn't take Leon's arm. Instead, she stepped down from the altar, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble. Leon turned, his dark eyes flashing with something that looked dangerously close to amusement, and fell into step beside her. The walk back down the aisle was entirely different. The silence remained, but the texture of it had changed. Before, it was pity. Now, it was sheer, suffocating shock. Naomi kept her chin elevated, her eyes fixed on the heavy oak double doors at the back of the church. She felt Leon's presence beside her, a solid, radiating heat. He didn't rush. He matched her pace perfectly, creating a physical barrier between her and the rows of staring guests. As they reached the vestibule, two massive men in tailored suits stepped out of the shadows, seamlessly falling into formation behind them. Naomi's breath caught slightly in her throat. The reality of what she was doing was starting to bleed through the adrenaline. Leon pushed open the heavy oak doors. The midday sun hit Naomi like a physical blow. The heat of the pavement, the smell of exhaust from the idling black SUV parked illegally on the curb, the distant honking of city traffic, it all rushed in, snapping the surreal bubble of the church. One of the men in suits opened the back door of the SUV. Leon gestured for her to get in. Getting a 20-pound wedding dress into the back of a car was a deeply unglamorous process. Naomi had to shove, cram, and practically fold the stiff tool into the leather interior. Leon stood by the door, completely silent, waiting until she had finally wrestled the fabric into submission. He slid in beside her, and the door slammed shut with a heavy vacuum-sealed thud. The immediate quiet of the armored vehicle was deafening. The air conditioning blasted, cold and dry, instantly chilling the sweat on Naomi's neck. Leon reached into a compartment between the seats, pulled out a heavy crystal tumbler, and poured a generous measure of amber liquid from a decanter. He handed it to her. Naomi took it, her hand shaking slightly. The glass was cold. The whiskey burned like a line of fire down her throat, but it forced her racing heart to settle. She took a deep breath, staring at the tinted partition separating them from the driver. "So," Naomi said, her voice tight. She rubbed the thumb where the thorn had pricked her, smearing a tiny dot of crimson on her white dress. "What exactly are the terms of my new acquisition?" Leon leaned back against the leather seat, turning his head to look at her. The harsh sunlight filtering through the tinted windows cast long shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his jaw. "I haven't decided yet," he said quietly. "But for starters, you're going to take those damn bobby pins out of your hair before they make your head bleed." Naomi blinked, startled by the hyper-specific observation. She reached up, finding a pin, and pulled it free. The sudden release of tension on her scalp was so intensely relieving, she let out a long, shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned to look at Leon. He wasn't staring at her with the possessive triumph of a mobster who had just stolen a bride. He was just watching her, his expression unreadable, waiting to see what she would do next. For the first time since she put the dress on that morning, Naomi didn't feel entirely trapped. She reached for another pin. The tires shifted from the steady hum of the highway to the harsh, rhythmic crunch of crushed gravel, before finally settling onto smooth, poured concrete. The SUV's engine cut out. The silence that rushed into the cabin was absolute, broken only by the faint, metallic ticking of the cooling exhaust beneath them. Naomi didn't look out the window. She was staring at her own lap, where her hands rested on a mountain of crushed white silk. Her thumbnail was still lightly smeared with dried blood from the bouquet's thorn. The heavy door was pulled open from the outside. The humid, late-afternoon air of the coastal hills rolled in, smelling sharply of wet pine needles, damp earth, and impending rain. Naomi swung her legs out. Her silver heels sank a quarter-inch into the pristine moss surrounding the driveway. Leon's estate was not a sprawling neoclassical mansion. It was a brutalist structure of dark-stained cedar, matte black steel, and massive panes of reinforced glass, built directly into the side of a forested ridge. It looked less like a home and more like a highly fortified bunker trying to disguise itself as modern architecture. "Inside," Leon said. He didn't wait for her. He walked up the wide stone steps, his footsteps completely silent. Naomi gathered her skirts. The dress, which had felt like a second skin at 8 this morning, now felt like a lead apron. Every step up the stairs required physical exertion. By the time she crossed the threshold into the cavernous, minimalist foyer, her lungs were burning, and the corset was digging a sharp, unrelenting trench into her lower ribs. The front doors locked behind them with a heavy mechanized clack that echoed off the polished concrete floors. Leon tossed his keys onto a floating console table. He stripped off his suit jacket, draped it over a chair, and rolled up the sleeves of his black shirt, exposing forearms corded with lean muscle and a faded, jagged tattoo snaking around his left wrist. "First door on the right is a guest suite," he said, not looking at her. He walked toward a massive, open-concept kitchen. "There's a shower, towels. I suggest you get out of that. You look like you're going to pass out." Naomi didn't argue. She didn't have the energy to demand answers, to ask where her father was, or to negotiate her release. She just wanted to breathe. She pushed open the heavy oak door to the guest suite. It was sterile, beautiful, and freezing. She locked the door behind her, dropping her small satin clutch onto the unmade bed. Then, the reality of her isolation hit her. She reached behind her back. The dress was fastened with a hidden zipper, reinforced by a line of 22 microscopic, silk-covered hook and eye closures. It had taken 2 bridesmaids and her mother 15 minutes to lace her into it. Naomi's fingers fumbled blindly at the top of her spine. She managed to undo the first 2 hooks, her shoulders aching from the unnatural angle. By the 4th hook, her manicured nails were slipping on the tightly pulled silk. By the 6th, a wave of sheer, exhausted frustration washed over her. She pulled hard. The fabric didn't give. The corset dug deeper into her ribs, a physical manifestation of the trap her father had built and Preston had sprung. She was locked in. A hot, ugly tear spilled over her lashes. She wiped it away furiously, smearing waterproof mascara across her cheekbone. She wasn't going to cry over Preston Reed. She wasn't going to cry in the house of a syndicate boss. She unlocked the bedroom door and walked back out into the hallway. Leon was standing at the kitchen island, drinking a glass of water. He paused, the glass halfway to his mouth, as she shuffled into the room. She looked entirely deranged, half the bobby pins pulled out of her hair, leaving loose braids hanging at awkward angles, her makeup smudged, the massive dress taking up half the walking space between the counters. "I need a pair of scissors," Naomi said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. "Or a knife." "A sharp one." Leon lowered the glass. He looked at the frantic tension in her jaw, then stepped around the island. "Turn around." "I am not asking you to help me. I am asking for a blade so I can cut this $50,000 mistake off my body." "Turn around, Naomi." It was the first time he had used her name. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like an instruction from someone who was intensely tired of watching people make things harder than they needed to be. She turned. She felt him step up behind her. The heat of his body was palpable in the heavily air-conditioned room. He didn't touch her skin. There was no gentle grazing of his knuckles against her spine, no romantic hesitation. His hands were strictly utilitarian, rough and deeply calloused. He found the seventh hook. Click. Naomi closed her eyes. Click, click, click. He worked his way down her spine with brutal efficiency. He didn't speak. Naomi stared straight ahead at the stainless steel refrigerator, focusing on her own distorted reflection in the metal. The scent of ozone and tobacco washed over her again, mixed with the faint, sharp smell of gun oil radiating from his clothes. It was terrifying. It was grounding. "Take a breath," Leon muttered. Naomi inhaled sharply. As she did, Leon gripped the hidden zipper and pulled it down in one smooth, aggressive motion. The heavy bodice immediately fell open. The rigid boning of the corset released her rib cage. Cold air rushed against her sweat-dampened back. The physical relief was so intense, so immediate, that Naomi's knees buckled slightly. Leon caught her by the elbow. His grip was a vice, solid, immovable. He held her upright for exactly 3 seconds, waiting until she found her footing. The moment she steadied herself, he released her and took a step back. "There are sweatpants in the bottom drawer of the dresser," he said, his voice returning to its normal gravelly indifference. "I'll order food." Naomi held the front of the dress to her chest, keeping it from pooling on the floor. She looked over her shoulder at him. He was already walking away, pulling a burner phone from his pocket. "Why am I here?" she asked, the question finally tearing its way out of her throat. Leon stopped. He didn't turn around. "Because you are the only thing in this city worth $20 million. Get dressed. We have a lot of paperwork to go over." The sweatpants were black, heavy fleece, and swallowed her entirely. Naomi found a faded gray t-shirt in the same drawer. The cotton washed so many times it felt incredibly soft against her battered skin. She spent 20 minutes in the bathroom, viciously scrubbing her face with a rough towel until the heavy bridal makeup was entirely gone, leaving her skin flushed and bare. She pulled the remaining pins from her hair, dragging a comb through the tight braids until her natural curls broke free, expanding into a thick, dark halo around her shoulders. Looking in the mirror, she didn't see the tragic, jilted heiress. She saw a woman who was acutely aware that she had just traded a suffocating corporate marriage for a cage with a different set of bars. She walked barefoot out of the guest suite. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain that had finally begun to beat against the floor-to-ceiling windows. She found Leon in a massive, open-plan office at the end of the hall. The room was dark, illuminated only by the harsh, concentrated beam of a brass desk lamp. He was sitting behind a large slab of reclaimed oak multiple files spread open across the surface. He looked up as she walked in. For a fraction of a second, his dark eyes stalled on her face. Without the makeup, the jewelry, and the armor of the dress, she looked younger, smaller. But the set of her jaw was entirely unchanged. It was rigid with defiance. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. Naomi walked over, the bare soles of her feet silent against the concrete, and sank into the heavy leather. It squeaked softly. On the desk between them was a steaming carton of take-out noodles and a bottle of cheap mineral water. She bypassed the food, grabbed the water, cracked the plastic seal, and drank half the bottle in 3 agonizingly long gulps. Leon watched her. He had taken off his dress shirt. He was wearing a plain black t-shirt now, and Naomi could clearly see the dark leather straps of a shoulder holster biting into the fabric beneath his arms. A dull, matte black handgun rested against his ribs. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't try to intimidate her with it. It was simply a part of his wardrobe. "Your father called," Leon said, leaning back in his chair. The leather groaned. 4 times. Arthur Reed called twice. "Did you answer?" Naomi asked, wiping a drop of water from her chin with the back of her hand. "No." Leon picked up a pen, tapping it rhythmically against a manila folder. "I let them sweat. By tomorrow morning, the Reed family stock will plummet when the public realizes the merger failed. Your father will be desperate because he still owes the banks, and the Reeds can't bail him out." Naomi stared at the folder. "And you? You're out $20 million. "I am." Leon stopped tapping the pen. "Which brings us to you." "I already told you at the church," Naomi said, her voice hardening. "I am not a piece of property you can seize to balance a ledger." "You're right," Leon agreed easily. Too easily. He slid the manila folder across the desk. It stopped inches from her hands. "Property is passive. Property doesn't hold the controlling signatures on the West Coast shipping manifests." Naomi's breath hitched. She looked down at the folder, then back up at him. Her heart began to beat with a slow, heavy rhythm. "My father is the CEO," she said carefully. "Your father is a figurehead who plays golf and hemorrhages money," Leon corrected, his tone flat and devoid of insult, just stating a mathematical fact. 6 months ago, he quietly transferred the operational licenses for the primary ports into a holding company to protect them from bankruptcy. A holding company registered in your name. He thought he was being clever. He thought the Reed merger would happen, the debts would be paid, and you'd transfer them back. Leon leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. The light from the lamp caught the jagged scar on his eyebrow. "Preston didn't walk away today just because he got cold feet. He walked away because I told him to." The silence in the room became incredibly dense. The sound of the rain outside seemed to amplify, a chaotic static against the quiet of the office. Naomi felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit her stomach. "You orchestrated the altar." "I expedited the inevitable," Leon said softly. "The Reeds are bleeding out. If you married Preston, your ports would have been liquidated to pay his father's debts. You would have lost everything." "So you saved me," Naomi laughed, a short, bitter, entirely humorless sound. "Is that the narrative? The cartel boss with a heart of gold?" "I don't give a damn about saving you," Leon replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I need those ports. My syndicate is moving out of illicit imports and transitioning to legitimate, high-volume international freight. I need the infrastructure your family spent 50 years building. I was going to take it from the Reeds after you married the kid, but cutting them out and dealing directly with the actual owner is cleaner." Naomi looked down at the folder. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what it was. It was a transfer of ownership. She slowly dragged her eyes back to his. The fear she had been carrying all day, the humiliation of the altar, the terror of the armored car, the panic of the corset, suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, searing clarity. He didn't kidnap a bride. He abducted a CEO. "You want my signature," Naomi said. "I want a partnership," Leon corrected. "You sign over 49% of the holding company to me. I absorb your father's debts. I provide the capital to modernize the ports. You keep your family's legacy from being sold off for parts, and you remain the majority stakeholder." Naomi stared at him. It was a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. If she said no, he would destroy her father, bankrupt her family, and likely take the ports anyway through sheer force. If she said yes, she was officially in bed with the Korean Mafia. But as she sat there, in his oversized clothes, looking at the man who had ripped her out of the most humiliating moment of her life with ruthless efficiency, she realized something profound. Preston had lied to her. Her father had used her. Leon Brooks was the only man today who had looked her in the eye and told her exactly what he wanted. Naomi reached across the desk. She didn't touch the pen. She touched the carton of noodles, pulling it toward her. She picked up the wooden chopsticks. 51% stays with me, Naomi said, her voice steady, stripping away the last remnant of the jilted bride. I maintain full operational control of the docks. Your people handle the logistics and security, but nobody moves a single crate through my ports without my explicit authorization. And you never, ever speak to my father again. All negotiations go through me. Leon watched her pull a tangle of noodles from the carton. He didn't blink. The silence stretched, tight and dangerous, as the underworld boss weighed the audacity of the woman sitting across from him. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. A slow, dark smirk ghosted across his face, altering the harsh lines of his features into something terrifyingly sharp. "Deal," Leon said. "If you love this story of power, betrayal, and unexpected alliances, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button and share it with your friends who crave dark, grounded romance with a cynical twist. Subscribe to the channel for more gripping, immersive audio stories delivered straight to your feed. Drop a comment below. Would you have walked out with Leon? Let us know and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new upload.